So our next speaker, our next moderator for the panel is David Gross. David Gross is the Director of Industry Relations and Strategy for the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation here at the University of Chicago. He focuses on building relationships with industry partners on behalf of the Polsky Center and manages a portfolio of strategic projects in areas of innovation and science. Prior to moving here, Dave was the Chief Operating Officer of a commercial construction company in Des Moines, Iowa. He has also worked in real estate strategy for Walgreens and started his career as a business analyst for Target in Minneapolis. Dave holds an MBA from Duke University and a BA from Northwestern University in economics and geography. David, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Felix. I'll invite our panelists to come up here. And we have two folks calling in, Paulina and Johnny. Felix, first off, thanks so much for the kind introduction, and I know you've put a ton of work into putting this day together, so thank you. I'm excited for the opportunity to moderate this panel, a topic, industry university synergies, that is closely related to the work that I do at the Polsky Center, bringing in corporate partners for strategic relationships. So rather than reading off bios here, I've asked the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, and also connection to the PME. So why don't we start with Dimitris? Good morning.
Again, I want to thank everyone for the invitation, and this, from what it looks like, and I'm sure it will be a great day. So I'm Dimitris Priftis. I guess my background is in chemistry. I was trained as a chemist. I have a master's and a PhD in polymer science from the University of Athens in Greece. After I finished my studies, I joined Professor Tyrell's group at Berkeley, California, in the bioengineering department. About a year later, Matt was selected to be the founding director of what at the time was called Institute for Molecular Engineering, now PME. So I was one of the 2 or 3 students that followed him here, which was a great decision. I've never regretted that decision. So my relationship with AME goes back to the very early days. Stayed here for another 4 years, 4 very cold winters. And then I decided to switch gears a little bit and move to the Boeing company in the aerospace industry, working in the Research and Development Center in South Carolina. I worked in their paints and coatings team. I also got a joint appointment, which I still have, with Clemson University as an adjunct professor in their Materials Science and Engineering department. And about a year ago, I moved to Florida at the Cape Canaveral Center, and I work for Blue Origin, again working on coatings, but for rockets and spacecrafts.
Thank you. Abe, next.
Abe Janis, thanks for having me. I'm very excited about this weekend. Let's see, my background, I did my undergrad at the University of Oregon and then my master's at Portland State. And from that, entered industry, and this was about 23 years ago. Went to Cook Biotech and did regenerative medicine with Michael Hiles for a few years. Then I went out to work for a series of startups for Alfred Mann in Los Angeles, followed by a regenerative medicine company in Maryland, which then took me and my funding down to Walter Reed, where I was before I came to Hollister approximately 8 years ago. Thanks.
Well, Paulina, if you can hear us, you want to give your bio and connection to PME.
So I'm Paulina Rincon. I graduated from chemical engineering and worked in the industry in Mexico for 5 years before I joined Professor Paul Neely's group at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And it was during my PhD that he offered me the opportunity to come to Belgium actually for an internship. So very relevant to this topic. So I came to imec. It's a research center for micro and nanoelectronics. And this, I was here to implement the work, the process that was created by Professor Neely on directed self-assembly of local polymers for semiconductor applications. when I was here, actually, Professor Neely moved to University of Chicago, so as part of the PME. So when I went back to the United States, I went directly to Chicago, where, I finished my PhD. And I was actually the first graduate from the PME program. And
Excellent.
after that, I came back to Belgium to continue working at imec, now as a staff member, but I continue doing research on materials and processes for, basically scaling down semiconductor devices. And that's what I do.
Thank you, Paulina. Johnny?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds good.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm Johnny Alfaro. I am originally from Costa Rica. I was working in academia before I joined PME. So I joined Professor De Pablo's lab in 2013. I was actually one of the first students that applied directly to, well, not to the program, but just admitted to the program. So unlike Paulina, I didn't come from the University of Wisconsin. I was one of the first ones to actually get to Chicago. And then I was working on the development of some freeze-drying processes for probiotic bacteria. It was a project that we were doing at that time with DuPont, and we were working on that for 3 years. And after I graduated in 2017, I joined DuPont as a scientist. And since then, I've been working on their different probiotic strains. I've been working mostly on freeze-drying, commissioning of their new equipment, as well as other downstreaming processes, going all the way from laboratory work to implementation and then optimization of those processes as well. Most recently, DuPont sold our part of the business, so now we're a new company called International Flavors and Fragrances, but nonetheless still doing the same type of work. And as for people to know as well, I'm also the representative of the PME in the Chicago Alumni Board. So always feel welcome to just come to me, and I'm just very glad to represent all of you and try to put PME up front with the different alumni as well.
Thank you, Johnny and Paulina. So thank you for the introductions, everyone. So the topic today is industry university synergies. The framework, the structure I'd like to use for today's discussion comes from the University Industry Demonstration Partnership, which is the preeminent group. It's a consortium that unites university and industry. So when they talk about what industry is interested in when working with industries, they use an inverted triangle framework where the top and largest layer is talent. That's really what industry is looking for. The middle layer is research. So they're looking for key opinion leaders that can help them solve problems. And third is IP. They're looking for technology that they can license and bring to their business. So I'd like to use that rough framework to structure our discussion. So starting with talent, and I'll ask this question to all four of you. And Abe, let's start with you. What paths have you used at Hollister to attract university talent?
So we have active recruiting with area universities. Our interaction with PME hasn't reached that other than our interaction with the My Choice program for PhD students. Primarily, we're interacting with PME through the undergrad capstone program right now. And we're going to be starting our 4th, possibly 5th and 6th programs this year.
Okay. Excellent. Johnny, what about you? What paths have you seen as successful for attracting university talent?
So in terms of industry, I think the most important things for us is trying to create interesting research that students would like to come and work with us. Usually, I mean, it's not uncommon to see groups where there are, multiple PhDs working on different types of projects. So I know that it's something that industry really sees that there's value in what a PhD graduate can bring, the type of, not only the knowledge that they may have from like how to, but also I want to say like the soft skills and the ability that people have already to know how to do research, even if you're not entirely familiar with it. I think that's like one of the most valuable things that you're bringing to the table, that soft skill set And yeah, that's what I would say is, for me, the most important part at this point.
Okay, thank you. Dimitris, what about you and your work at Boeing and now at Blue Origin?
So I've worked with very big companies, right? And they have an army of recruiters and a lot of resources spent on bringing in talent. If you ask them actually the same question, what they would say is that I would prefer a way that doesn't cost me in resources and time. And also reduces the risk, because when you invest this time and resources, you want to make sure that you made the right decision. And the best way to do that is by working with the person before you hire him. And this can be done with events, small sponsored programs like a CapCode project or direct research funded projects. I had this opportunity at Clemson to bring in students and have them work there. And then you get to know the person better, you reduce your risk, you don't have to look any further, he's trained already to some extent.
Sure.
So that's definitely something that I've seen happening a lot, and I think it's the one that at least major companies prefer.
Okay. Paulina, what do you think the PME can do to better prepare the students for success in an industry role?
Well, just by experience, and actually this is my experience, I was, as I said, lucky to come to Belgium and come to a research center like imec, where before I graduated, I had already worked with material suppliers and chip manufacturers, tool suppliers, and showing the way, our way of working, that, our creativity, our flexibility, that definitely, that opened a ton of opportunities and a lot of doors for me. So yeah, when I graduated, I was actually in a very good position, because companies already knew our work, and not only the skills, the working skills, but also, the human part, that being able to go to different environments and working there and communicating with different people. That's also something that I think companies really value, and especially with these internships or collaborations in general. That's a way to develop those skills.
Thank you. So Dimitris, in my conversations with industry, I hear a lot about they're looking for students with interdisciplinary experience. What exactly that means is up to interpretation. But in your work at Blue Origin and Boeing, what have you seen as a good experience set that would breed success at those companies?
So in the space industry and the aerospace industry, I don't think there's a single problem that is not interdisciplinary.
Sure.
I mean, we're doing things that we either have never done, or we need to develop materials that have never been developed before, right? So we need people from all sorts of backgrounds. We need chemists to understand the codings, we need physics, we need good engineers to develop these things. So all of these are very useful. And the more of these skills you have as an individual, the more qualified you are for these jobs. But that doesn't mean that if you... so this is exactly where PME is great, because it gives you access to all of these areas, and then to some extent you're immediately qualified for this kind of jobs. But that doesn't mean that all industries are the same. But I think in my case, the definition of interdisciplinary is probably this industry. So yeah, that doesn't mean that you should know a little bit of everything and really nothing.
Sure.
But again, like this approach to problems, that you need more than one discipline, more than one skill, is really what makes you good for this kind of job.
Johnny, what about your experience at DuPont and now IFF? What type of experience leads to success?
I mean, I would definitely agree with Dimitris. Reflecting on the type of different disciplines that I've worked with, at least in our company, I mean, we work with microbiologists, biologists, different type of engineers, and I agree with him. Like, if you were trying just to do it all by yourself, you go crazy, right? There's the value of like the different expertise that people have and how you tap into what everyone is just good at. And when you all come together, that's really when you can, make all of these projects work and solve these problems. So I would agree. I haven't seen a single project that you just solve with just one discipline. I don't think that's really the answer. So I know it sounds multidisciplinary is a buzzword, but it's really what happens out there.
Excellent. So Abe, in your experience at Hollister, how has university talent brought a fresh perspective to problems you're trying to solve as a company?
So we do have a very successful co-op program with another Chicago area university, and I currently have a data analytics student who's really been expanding our horizons. I have a chemical engineering student in the lab. I've had a series of biomedical engineers. But one of the cool projects that we kicked off in about 2019 was a futurism trend spotting program. And our co-ops are always some of the most prolific contributors to that process, bringing in the diversity of opinions. But back to what you were asking about with the multifunctional and interdisciplinary. I think that's really kind of tricky to tell a student to be multidisciplinary. They don't really know how to do that. And so what I typically explain to them instead is that it's very important to be that translational person. Like, go out to the edges of your field and be able to talk to other fields. So you don't necessarily have to be talented or experienced in both fields. As long as you can hold a conversation, that will lead to a lot of innovative conversations.
Sure.
And serendipity.
Sure. Paulina, how about you? How has university talent brought fresh perspective to imec?
That's easy. So just to tell you, imec is actually it was a spin-off of the Catholic University of Leuven. So still after 25 years, 30 years, about 15 to 20% of our workforce is actually made of graduate students, postdocs, master students, not only from the KUL, but we have collaborations with many universities around the world that are, of course, doing research in topics relevant for imec. So that tells you how we value these fresh ideas, these incredibly hardworking people, and yeah, I mean they do bring a lot of value, and we recognize it, and we always try to get more students. So no, it's definitely clear, what great job they can do in the industry.
So shifting gears here a little bit to research and IP, and Paulina, I'll stay with you. In your experience, what type of research problems are universities well equipped to solve, and how have you seen that in your experience?
Well, it definitely has to be, of course, a fundamental problem, right? And also as a PhD student, I mean, to do work for your own PhD, there has to be some science behind it. So and maybe these problems are not the problems that will be implemented immediately in the industry. They're more probably long-term projects where a deep understanding of a certain phenomena needs to be developed. And and there's plenty of companies, like Dimitris just said, the space industry. I can tell you also in the semiconductor industry. I mean, there's research projects that really look that we think that are going to be implemented in 5 or 10 years. And that's where students are this type of projects are perfect for students. And yeah.
Thank you. Dimitris, perspective on that one?
Yes. Again, big companies have shareholders, they have deadlines, they have flow rates,
Sure.
They don't have luxury of time to deal with fundamental projects. But that doesn't mean that they're not interested in. They're interested in new technologies, in new processes, in new materials. They just don't have the bandwidth to invest. So I think the universities in general are more equipped to do this kind of early research, as Paulina said. And then the collaboration between the two is actually of great importance, because you need to understand the requirements in general, which is something that the universities they don't have a full understanding, right? So they have the ability to develop, but they don't know what to test it again, let's say, if it's a new material. So I think early stages research is where the universities have a lot to offer, but then again, industry collaboration is necessary in order to kind of direct that research and make sure that it's applicable and reduce the 5 to 10 years that it might take.
Sure. Johnny, how about you? Can you share an example of a successful research partnership that you've seen in your experience and why it was successful?
Sure. So I would say it's probably my own experience with the PhD program. So as you know, as Paulina and Dimitris were mentioning, really fundamental research is something that big companies have problems with because, as Dimitris mentioned, we have very goal-oriented, very time-crunch type of projects, whereas during a PhD you have more time and freedom to do it. So in my 3-year project with DuPont, while I was in my PhD, I thought that was a really successful collaboration because, number one, we were tackling a fundamental question on freeze drying that no one in the world at that point really had an idea as to what was going on. And it was really critical because we needed to figure out why something was going on and it was always wrong, because if you can understand why it's wrong, then you can try to work it backwards and try to get back to like, okay, this is the solution, this is how you can always try to get it right. And that's a type of like fundamental issues. Like sometimes it's a lot of science and industry doesn't really have that the time and resources there. So universities are better equipped in that case. They have the students that can focus on those type of projects, and the professors as well. I mean, they have a lot of experience. They have a lot of ideas that they can always try. And there's, I feel, sometimes more creativity and more flexibility in the lab, and for you to pursue those ideas that sometimes in industry we're a little constrained in that sense.
Excellent. Johnny, just building on your experience, is there anything you would have done differently during your PhD studies? We have a lot of students in the room today, so any sage wisdom you can offer?
That's a good point. What would I have done different? I guess reflecting on maybe things that worked really well instead of maybe things I could have done different. I used to have meetings every week with our collaborators at DuPont, and I thought that was very useful because it gave me, number one, the opportunity to have quicker feedback as the type of work that I was doing. If I was becoming too derivative, I could stop that type of line and be like, okay, well, maybe that's really not going to work. Maybe I should just focus on something else, because sometimes you have 3 to 5 ideas, and it takes time. Sometimes you're spending 3 months now on something that maybe it wasn't really necessary, or maybe you can now pursue another thing. So that type of feedback was, I think, something very positive. So I wouldn't have changed that. I think that was very valuable. And I don't know, it's just hard to think what I would have done different, because honestly, I think that it just went pretty well and it was pretty smooth. And the type of project, and I ended up working for DuPont. I say that as a joke, but I feel like it was the longest job interview in that case, because they knew the type of work that I was doing, how my thinking was, and how I can get those results, which is something that they also value in industry, that you can deliver things in a timely manner. But even if, sometimes they understand it doesn't work. That's how science is. You try something, it doesn't work. And, you have to forgive yourself for that. Maybe that's a word of advice. If it's not working, don't be too hard on yourself.
Sure. Well, it sounds like it was a very successful job interview based on where your career has gone to date. So, Abe, we can't have a discussion about industry university without at least touching on intellectual property. So in my experience, there are ways to structure these so it's a win-win for both the university and industry. From Hollister's perspective, what are the most important terms when you're engaging with the university about a potential deal, whether that be talent, sponsored research, material transfer agreement?
Right. So I'm just speaking from my own experience and not the company's position, but at least for the capstone agreements that we've done so far, we typically have an agreement with the students that if we provide a real-world problem, the background of where the field is, This is always amazing to them because they're so surprised that there's so many unmet needs left in these spaces. And then we provide mentorship. My colleague Adrian DeFont, who's also here today, is actually helping with that. In exchange, the students agree to sign over any IP that comes out of the project. Mm-hmm. So that's as far as we've taken it on these capstones. I think what's nice about this program of relationships that we're building in around mostly the Chicago area is that this is a way to almost take a bite-sized piece and demonstrate the value of these types of relationships. Because as you move into the graduate students, or you start collaborating with investigators, the terms become a little bit more tangled and a lot more work. So this has been an easy first step.
Okay. What do you think is next? What would be the next step in engagement for Hollister?
With PME or in
with
general?
PME.
I'd really like to see a co-op program.
Okay.
I think actually right now I'm interacting with students for almost a year, and they're undergrads at the end of their degree. But it'd be very nice if master's or PhD students who wanted to spend a year in industry do what we do with Northwestern and actually have a student come in and add a whole year of working with us.
Well, I think we have the staff in the room today to make that happen, so excited to hear that. So Dimitris, you were here for close to the founding of IME, now PME. Looking 10 years from now, so 2030, where would you like to see the PME in terms of industry engagement?
Well, first of all, I would love to see, I would call it division of PME around space industry.
Okay.
I'm very excited about that, obviously the industry that I work in, so I would
Okay.
I would definitely want to see that. But again, I would say stay as you are. I think, again, going back to the interdisciplinary discussion, right? The fact that professors from different backgrounds are recruited and work on all these different disciplines is done under the same roof is what creates the science that is needed for all industries. So, yeah, obviously I would want to see a little bit more space here, but at the same time, I feel like even if nothing changes, I still think would be a very good idea and very useful for our field.
Excellent. Paulina, what about you? Where would you like to see the PME in 10 years in regards to industry partnerships?
Oh, I have to say I agree with Dimitris. I mean, I've seen, and you know, from my experience, and also what Johnny just said. I mean, the PME is actually very willing and you know, to enable the students to have, you know, these type of collaborations and go abroad and have different experiences and you know, that are going to be relevant for their PhD, of course, but also that will prepare them much better for any job that they want to take in the future. So, no, I think that, I mean, you guys have the opportunities, and for the students, I mean, just take them, because it's not that every university offers those possibilities, and definitely, yeah, in the PME, this is a reality. So take those opportunities, and yeah, just ask, and there's, yeah, it has been done, and I hope that it just continues to be done in the future.
Excellent. Paulina, I'll put you on the spot again here. Same question that I asked Johnny. Anything you would have done differently in your PhD experience?
No, I agree with Johnny. Actually, I would say that instead of saying what I would have done differently, because it was a fantastic experience for me. The whole process with the internship and having the support of, you know, Professor Neely all over through the whole project. No, it was great, but definitely communication. In the case of Johnny, it was his communication with the company. In my case, I was away at the company for more than 2 years. So for me, being able to communicate with Professor Neely was actually crucial. And yeah, I was. We were always having also calls, yeah, trying to yeah, give him updates and get some guidance, and try to explain to him, you know, how things were going on and how things were done in an industrial environment, in a pilot plant like imec is, and compared to the lab, and But yeah, that was learning for both of us, I think. But definitely communication is crucial in this type of experiences.
Excellent. So one last question for Abe, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from the group. I believe the protocol will be to go to the microphone to ask the questions. And if there's no questions, I'll go to Efren for the chat. So Abe, in your experience, how does Hollister and companies you've worked with in the past view co-locating near university campuses? That's closely related to my other portfolio of work, which is working on real estate projects for U Chicago. So how does Hollister think about those things?
I don't know how my current company, I mean, obviously if there was space available, that would be very interesting. And we've been speaking with organizations such as MHub and Matter for some space. We haven't, as far as I'm aware, looked at co-locating yet. Okay. But if you look at the success of companies in the Purdue Research Park, right? That was actually my first job out of grad school, was going and working for Cook. And it was one of the companies I worked for was a spin-off from a Purdue lab. So that's, I think, a very valuable thing to offer.
Okay. Dimitris, what about you? Have you seen any success with co-locating in your experience?
Actually, I almost had an opportunity to work in one of these examples. When I was at Boeing, there's a lab in collaboration with Georgia Tech that is co-located. So a few students and a few Boeing employees working under the same roof. I've seen it work. I think it was successful. I wouldn't say it's very common, at least for our industry, but I've seen it happen and I've seen it work well. So I guess it depends on the situation and
sure,
and the research topic.
Sure. Okay. At this point, any questions from the audience here in person?
I have a question.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
To state who I am.
Yes, that'd be great. Thanks, Sharon.
Hello, I'm Sharon Fang. I'm the Director of Science Technology for PPG Industries. Not to mistaken as a P&G, we don't make cereals. Okay, my question really is interested in knowing the vision of PME for the industrial partnership program in the future. Right now we talked a lot about, I call them nascent interactions, right? Talent exchange, recruiting, collaboration through faculty, projects. But is there some plan strategically to have a group of very strategic relationship with a certain group of companies up and down the industrial vertical so you can actually plan for innovation,
Sure.
not by chance?
Sure.
So I think you're talking about 10 years out, whenever, sorry, Matt put you on the spot. But, what is that future look like? I'm very interested.
Well, thank you for the question. Matt, you want to take that one? Our honorary panelist here, Dean Matt Terrell.
Well, this is, as you know, we have a new president of the University of Chicago named Paul Alfaro-Perez. And I had lunch with him yesterday, and we were talking about this exact thing. We think that being small, just as we've made really focused investments in research directions, it might be the most effective for us to make very focused industrial partnerships, too, in places where what we're doing matches up with either a large company or a set of compatible larger companies, ones that might fill out a supply chain in a certain area or something like that. So the discussions of that have begun. I can't say that we have any definite plans yet on how to implement that, but I will say that enhancing our industrial interactions is really right at the top of the list of priorities for the next decade.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean Terrell.
As long as I'm here, could I ask something?
Yeah, please.
I've been interested in Abe bringing up this question of internships and co-ops. As an undergraduate, I co-opted with that university in the northern suburb of Chicago, and it was an extremely interesting and important formative experience for me. It actually led me to realize I didn't really want to work for a living. I wanted to become a professor and go to graduate school. But seriously, it was a very good and informative experience. Undergraduate co-ops are different from graduate internships and experiences, and we've been exploring those. I think we have someone who's doing one of those right now in the company that Sharon works for, but we'd like to do a lot more. But anything you'd like to say about how, well, first of all, the differences between undergraduate and graduate internships and co-ops, and second of all, you know, how important they are in developing university-industry relationships, I'd like to hear about.
Yeah. Abe, you want to kick us off, and then others, feel free to chime in.
So currently, I think the only graduate students that we have would be students transitioning from their undergraduate to the master's program. I think when you're doing a graduate internship, it becomes more complex because that student has their PI, and they also then have their industry job, and figuring out who owns the project is very difficult. One of the things that I have seen is adding in the industry advisor onto the committee, and that might be a way to share in that. But again, those types of agreements take a lot longer than these relatively easy agreements with the students.
Just one supplementary comment. When we've done it, and it's only been a handful of times, the PhD student works for the company for the summer. It's not part of their PhD. We just decide this is an informative part of their education, and they work for the company, and so there's no challenge to who owns what there.
Okay, perfect.
Dimitris, do you want to chime in?
Yes, and Matt already made the point that I wanted to make, because really, at least at Boeing, where we had a lot of examples that I can think of, Boeing wants to control all the IP that comes out of these relationships. So in most of these cases, it doesn't really lead to a bigger collaboration. Having said that, there's other forms of collaborations that are typically when we go after a big problem. I can give you an example of chromate primers, which is I mean, for 60 years we've been using materials and coatings that have a component that it's now regulated and we cannot use anymore. But that's a problem that almost every company in that field cannot solve by itself. So there's a lot of consortiums with universities, other companies that go after a bigger problem that can lead to a much bigger collaboration. In the case of internships, which are in our case actually both at Blue and Boeing, are open to everyone. There's no preference there. It's an online system. It's like a job interview, but it does lead to, most of the times, into a full job. But that typically, because of the IP and the complications that were just mentioned, it doesn't really lead to something bigger. But consortiums actually can lead to a long-term relationship with a university or even a competitor.
Paulina or Johnny, I'll open the floor to you. Any comments on that D-Trail's question?
Well, Johnny, when it comes to differences with undergrad, I have to say we're not. We don't have a lot of experience with undergrads, but when it comes to enabling PhD students, I think imec is not a company; it's a research center, so it's easier there. We have very well-defined ways of working, not only with the universities, because it's so common for us to work with universities, but also, even though we're not a company, we do work with a lot of companies. So imec has developed very well-defined ways of working or ways of defining, IP ownership to enable students, work with material suppliers, and it's very clear when some development comes, then who owns what, and so having this established methodologies, at least it has helped attract many students and yeah, so like I said, from many different universities to work at imec and work with these companies as well through imec. Yeah, it's a complex situation, but there's always, well, there's ways to do it, like in our case. Yeah, that's all I can say about it.
Okay. Johnny, do you want to chime in on this one?
Sure. So I guess reflecting a little bit back on Professor Terrell's words, we don't have a lot of experience with graduate students, but more with co-ops for undergrads, and even so, I mean, we have had good experiences in that case. I think it's a very discerning time for people to know, what type of place they want to work in, what type of career they want to pursue. And then not necessarily my experience, but some of my friends that also studied at PME, I think when they were doing internships in their 4th, 5th year of their PhD, it was also very helpful for them to decide, what type of career they want to go. I mean, do they want to become professors and then, try to pursue a postdoc, or would they like to go to industry, and, what type of industry they would like to go, because it's not necessarily the same. You might be trained for, the specific type of path right now, but that doesn't mean that you cannot jump in the future to a different type of field. You really have the tools to go and learn something new and different. So it really becomes up to each student to decide what type of career can have, and careers really change over time, and it's just opening the doors to our students to come and experience what it feels like, what they want to do, what they want to see. And in terms of IP, I mean, if it's, as Professor Terrell said, if it's just for a short period of time, there's usually already, kind of like things have been settled, that the company will own that type of IP. But consortia, as Dimitris and Paulina have said, I mean, that is a little bit different. They do exist, but obviously it's also good places where industry and academia come together and tackle different problems that both of us are struggling with.
Well, thank you for that perspective, Johnny and Paulina. We just have a few minutes left. Any last questions from the audience? Question here.
Sorry, there's no graceful way to get from here to there.
My name is Wayne Delker. I'm on the advisory board of PME. Based on Felix's introduction, the students at PME have a different type of training because of the multidisciplinary nature of it. For those of you that are graduates and those of you that hire graduates, do you see differences in PME graduates compared to, say, their counterparts at Berkeley, Stanford, or MIT?
Anyone want to jump in on that one? Dimitris,
I haven't had experience in hiring students, but I had an opportunity to work with a lot of people with different backgrounds. And I guess the most important thing is the way of thinking. Schools with traditional departments, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering departments, approach problems in the way they were trained to approach them. And even myself as a chemist, in the beginning of my career, I used to approach everything from a chemistry perspective. But my years at the PME that's when I started thinking and approaching problems differently. I think that's very important. The interactions, and going back to the point earlier, being able to talk with people and not be afraid to talk with people from different backgrounds and different industries is what really creates the best solutions, and the faster ones too. So I would say it's a way of thinking that is different than schools with traditional departments.
Paulina, Johnny, any comments on this one?
So I'll go first. You're fine with that, Paulina. So as Dimitris, I haven't had that hiring experience, but what I could definitely say is, yes, it's kind of like the mindset of like the people you talk with, but to me, a very strong component of the PME program is the the communication skills and the science communication part of it specifically, because trying to communicate, something that can be very complicated in a simple way, I think that is something that I've seen from, the different students in the PME that really works pretty well, because in industry, trying to be concise, it's very appreciated. And that's something that I've seen some other grad students struggle with, is just trying to synthesize their ideas and, or, write an email that, it's not super long, or they spend like 2 hours to try to get something out and trying to make it perfect,
Sure.
if that makes sense.
Sure. Paulina, a response on this one, or any final parting thoughts for the group?
Yeah, no, well, same as Johnny and Dimitris. Especially being outside of the U.S., I haven't had an experience hiring people, but definitely, at least from my personal experience at the Neely group, is this being able to talk to different types of people, and at least our group was an extremely multicultural and diverse group. So there's, that also helps a lot. So we had a lot of collaborations with the Pablo group, and I guess hopefully with others. And that's always, those things that you normally don't see on the CV. But at the time when you are actually at the job, then it actually helps a lot. As just being able to talk to different people, and as Dimitri said, not being an expert at the topic, but being able to understand it and just communicate. I think that's one of the biggest advantages that I experience in the PE.
Excellent. Well, Johnny, Paulina, thanks for calling in from around the world. It was nice chatting with you. And Abe, Dimitris, thanks for being here in person. This was a great discussion, so thanks for being a part of it. And thank you to the audience for being here today.
Let's thank our panelists.